Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazisich. Okay, now coming here, to Deuteronomy chapter 32, we pick up here where we left off. And for those who are new to this, basically what we're looking at here is the Aleppo Codex. And note here that the tradent, and it may be that tradent may be Ben Buya or Buya, and he wanted to, begin the page with Ida, and that's from the previous chapter 31, which says, "And I shall testify to the heaven and earth against them," and because this squares perfectly here with the poetry that begins here in chapter 32 of the Ha'azinu, because and that, remember, Ha'azinu becomes the title for this song in Hebrew because the opening words are Ha'azinu, which says, "Give ear, O heaven, that I may speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth." Imre Fi. Just so that you understand that why he's framing the text this way, because he made all these spaces here, and this isn't normal, and he's creating all these spaces so that it will line up with the opening words of this page, and since it specifically addresses the thesis for the song that Moses is writing this song, that it may be a didactic lesson, so that they would know their history and their rebelliousness as a nation, from the perspective that God gave to Moses. And when we come to the text itself down here, note it's written in distichs. We have, like this would be like line A, and then we have a caesura here, and then you have line B, and it continues so on and so forth with line A, line B, line A, and line B. And because each line gives a thought, and then that thought, into the next verse set, is either going to it's going to have some type of correspondence, and this is and the most obvious correspondence is what the bishop referred to as synonymous parallelism. So where we have give ear and let the earth hear. So we have our verbal words here, give ear and let the earth hear, and then we have heaven and we have earth, and that I may speak, and the words of my mouth. So you can see that the thoughts are there's a correspondence between line A and line B, and this is how parallelism is then to be segmented into line A, B, or C. Now, I'm not going to necessarily agree with all his distichs. There may be tristichs in here, or we may need to break something up. But essentially, he's getting the thought in each line, and there is some correspondence between the first line to the second line, and we will discuss this as we move on in the text. Okay, then coming here to our text, remember here from last time we ended here in verse 3. So, all that we got to last time was looking at the exordium according, remember, to Tegay's analysis. And we had the call to attention here in 31 chapter 32, verse 1. And then he had this quatrain here of similes, so that they would list. It was listing a purpose, how they would give attention to his words, and we saw that here in verse 2, and then verse 3 was the basis. Then, for I shall proclaim the name of the Lord. And then in the corresponding live, this is like, the cause, and then the cause would be for Moses is proclaiming Yahweh's name, and the effect should be then that they would give greatness to our God, and so that's the structural analysis, somewhat here of what we looked at previously. And what we're going to look at today, we're going to get down here to the thesis statement here in verses 4 and 5, and then after that in verse 6, then he has another quatrain here, but this time we have rhetorical questions concerning their behavior. So we are going to look here at the opening lines, concerning the very thesis of the Song of Moses that we will see here in verses 4 and 5. Okay, so we will read out here just verses 4 to 6 here, and we'll cover the character of God here in these two distichs, and then it will be followed by one distich concerning the character of the people, and then he ends here with two rhetorical questions, basically asking them, what do you think you're doing? So the text here begins in verse 4. Hadzur tamim po olo, ki kol derachav mishpat. El emuna ve'ein avel, zadik ve'yashar hu, shechet lo banav mumam, dor ikesh u petal tol, ha ladonai u nig meluzot, am naval velo chacham, halo hahu avicha kanecha, ahu asecha vayichonenecha. So that is our text, that's our translation, and it would be good for us to stop right here before we go to, we continue on, because this represents the core thesis for the Song of Moses. Okay, then we'll offer up our translation here, beginning in verse 4. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without injustice, righteous and upright is he. Shall you in this manner repay to Yahweh, a foolish people and without wisdom? Is he not your father, the one who acquired you? He is your maker and the one who establishes you. Okay, then just to pick up here with our following the structural analysis of Tegay here. Last week we looked at the exordium verses 1 to 3. So now we're on the history of God's relations with Israel, and this is verses 4 to 18, and it begins off here with the thesis in verses 4 to 6, and it covers God's justice and Israel's disloyalty. We saw that in verses 4 and 5, and then it ended with rhetorical questions, basically asking Israel, what were you thinking? And then it goes in here the history of God's benefactions with Israel, And in verses like 7 to 9, it's past history, and then in 10 following, it's going to then be, present history, and eventually it will go to future history. So that's how this is going to go here. So today we'll get to up to verses 7 to 9. But it's good to understand how the song progresses, and a little bit of structure helps you, divide up the text into its constituent thoughts. Okay, now coming then to our text for today. So we're going to pick up here in verses 4 down to 5, and then we're going to look at 6 by itself. And this is, remember, we're on point B here, and this is the history of God's benefactions with Israel. And we'll start it here at verse 4. We're just following today. And verses 4 through 6 itself makes up the thesis statement. Okay, so the thesis statement is that he's testifying to the heaven and earth against them, that in the latter days they are going to apostatize from the faith. That is the definitely the theological reasoning behind the Trident, Ben Buya, the Trident who copied the Aleppo Codex, and he had set up the most likely it was he, instead of Aaron ben Asher, who set up the text in such a way that it began with Ve'aida, I testify again, to the heaven and earth against them, as you remember. So this is the thesis statement of that testimony. So in verse 4, okay, you're going to have the character of God. Okay, that's what's going to come first. And then in verse 5 is then going to be the character of the people. And then in verse 6, he's asking them rhetorical questions of, what were you thinking? Okay, so that's basically the flow of verses 4 through 6. So this is called the thesis statement, the character of God. We'll look at that here in verse 4, then the character of the people, and then the rhetorical questions. And then, and this is what we're going to be looking at today. And then 7 here, remember, this is the history of God's benefactions with Israel. So A was the part A here was the exordium here, the introduction, the call to attention with the heavens and the earth, and that then he, his instruction that his that which he has acquired and his speech would drop as the rain and so on and so forth. And it ended with the basis clause in verse 3. Okay, so now when we come to 7 to 9, this is dealing with the prehistory, the past. Okay, because he starts here in verse 7, remember the days of long ago. Discern the years of generations and generations. Ask your father, and he will declare to you, your elders, and they shall tell you. So this is talking about the past relationship of God's care for Israel, and we'll get into that. But you need to understand the logical flow of the text, and then once you get to verse 10, well then, which is here, this is 10. You'll see that now it's going to go, 7 to 9 dealt with the past relationship because they had to, ask their elders, they asked their fathers about days of long ago. And we'll get to that. The core of that is in 8 and 9. Once you get to 10, then it's the present. Okay, so 10 following is going to be about the present time. This is past time, and then he'll get to the future time when they'll apostatize. So, and just look at 10. He found him in a wilderness land, in a howling, formless desert. He encircled him, and we could say he took stock of them, or he took note of them. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. As an eagle, stirs up his nest and hovers over his young, he spread out his wings and took him and carried him upon his pinions. So this is, excellent, poetry, but it's talking then more about the present when God, then took, it took the country out of bondage, out of Egypt to Mount Sinai. So this is, so you can tell there's a past, and then there's a present, and there'll be a future. So the history of God's benefactions with Israel will continue through this. It's very, very important for you to understand the flow of the text, and then, you can then, divide the text up into sections and understand the just the flow and the the natural progression of the text. So now we're going to come back here to the core thesis statement for the Ha'azinu, for the Song of Moses. We're talking now about the character of God. So the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of faithfulness and without injustice, righteous and upright is he. So then, this is God's character, and note that he is depicted as a rock. So a rock, and we're talking about a mountain rock, some big massive like half moon at Yosemite. So you have a rock that's stable, that's not going anywhere. And is immovable. So this is a source of strength, of refuge. So this is God, and he is being here. This is not a simile. This is a metaphor. So the rock, his work is perfect. So all his, he's just trying to say here that there's nothing about God that he needs time to to actualize himself, or become of age. God is that's why we call him God. He's already there. And then the second verset, is a basis clause. All his ways are justice. So you can see here in verse 4. It's very important for you. This isn't, like what we saw up here, with synonymous parallelism. Let's go back to, Deuteronomy 32:1. Give ear, O heavens, that I may speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth. So that's, line A, we have give ear, hear, heaven, earth, that I may speak the words of my mouth. These are, so line A here, this first verset, first part of the first diastic, of the first verset of the diastic, is being paralleled by the second. But when we come here to verse 4, we have left this, what we would call synonymous parallelism, and we have statements, okay? But it's still poetry, okay? Note here that we've got 1, 2, 3, and the way that Ben Asher, marked the text, we have 1, 2, because we have the Makev here. This is all his ways here. This is this is all one prosodic word, and 3. So we have a 3, and so you have to find out, well, then what's the relationship between line A to line B? Well, it's in the form of a declaration and then a basis statement. So it's not always synonymous parallelism. So let's look once again at the fundamental operating principles of biblical Hebrew poetry. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to understand the fundamental operating principles of biblical Hebrew poetry. And I said the following: the basic fundamental operating principles of biblical Hebrew poetry can be characterized as distinct modes of discourse. So these are just all the different types of poetic works that you can find within the Bible. There can be a heroic, piece. There can be a braggadocio piece, like the lament I should say the boasting of Lamech, in Genesis. And you can have prophetic discourse, like as what we're looking at now, in some sort of prophetic slash a covenant lawsuit, and then you have laments, like the whole book of Lamentation, and you have lyric poetry, erotic poetry, as we find in the Psalms and in the Song of Solomon. So there's different types of poetry. There's distinct modes of discourse. Now, whose prosodic words are communicated and developed by means of discrete units of linearized rhythmical thoughts. Okay, so now here is the core of this of the operating principles that trade in and oscillate between accentual, syntactic, and semantic principles. Now, semantic principles is going to refer to Hebrew parallelism, such as here. Give ear, O heavens, that I may speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth. Okay, so this is, and this is followed here. Let that which I have learned drop as the rain. May it distill may my speech distill as the dew, as showers upon the grass, or as gentle rain upon the grass, as showers upon the vegetation. So verse 3, for I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Okay, so this is going to be, we've left here. This is all up here. 1 and 2 is basically synonymous parallelism. This line A corresponds with this line here. This line here corresponds with this line here. But when we come here to 3, we don't have that. It's not operating according to semantic principles. It's operating. You need to find out what is the relationship or the correspondence between line A and line B. So here we have a 4-3 beat. So this is operating between. This is oscillating. This is accentual because we've got like a 4-3. So that 4-3 is like a 4-4 or a 3-3 or a 2-2, whatever. So its basis is accentual, and it's really not functioning syntactically, but the relationship is one of cause and effect. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, and what happens after that? He tells them to ascribe greatness to our God. Why? It's a cause and effect. I proclaim, the name of Yehovah. So and that's going to happen in verse 4. The rock, his work is perfect, and then their response is supposed to be to, ascribe greatness to our God. So it's either going to be semantic principles. That's the glue that binds this all together, that we can identify that this is poetry. But it's not always semantically related or synonymous related. It can be accentual and it can be syntactic, and there's could be morphological. But these are the three biggies. And so when you come to now we're going to go back to our text and we're going to then look at, we understand we've got discrete units of linearized rhythmical thoughts. So it's important that it's a rhythmical thought, and I say rhythm because it's going to be uttered in such a way, it's going to be communicated originally in such a way where the thought is emphasized. There's going to be a caesura, there's going to be a break, so that you're going to understand line A is so, which much more B is so. Remember, we're following the principles of other Jewish scholars who've gone before us, and I'm specifically speaking of the scholar from Harvard, and so this is cause and effect here. That's the correspondence that binds these two together, along with the accentual. Well, we've got a rhythmical thought here that takes up 4 prosodic words, and it's followed by one that takes up 3 prosodic words, and we can further define the thoughts. How are the thoughts related of line A to line B? Well, it's more of cause and effect, but it functions as the basis for what he said up here in verses 1 and 2. That's the function of verse 3. Okay, so now that we come here back to verse 4 and we look at the poetic distichs, remember we're looking at discrete units of linearized rhythmical thoughts. So it's going to be a thought, and it's lineated. Okay, so there's going to be they're going to come in either 2s or 3s, distichs or tristichs. You could actually, a tristic would be like a third line, okay? But these happen to be distichs here, and there's no tristic yet, as of yet. So let's look at the rhythmical thought. So it's going to be a thought. The rock, his work is perfect. And then we have, for all his ways, ki chol de rachav mishpat. For all his ways are justice. So this isn't like what we saw up here, with the synonymous parallelism in verses 1 and 2. It was more like here in verse 3, for I will proclaim the name of Yehovah. And then the second line is now it's a command to the Levites and to the children of Israel. If Moses is going to proclaim the name of the Lord, after he does that, they are to ascribe greatness to our God. So not exactly synonymous parallelism, but it's a thought of more of cause and effect. Moses here is proclaiming, and then after they hear that, then as a result, they are then to ascribe greatness to our God. So the correspondence between the lines in verse 3 are going to function that way. When we come to 4, the rock, his work is perfect, and now this is a basis clause. For all his ways are justice. So you can see that when you look at verse 4, you're not going to think that this has anything to do with poetry. It has no parallelism. But here, the operating principles, you can see we've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 1. We've got 2 that's connected by a macav, and 3. So we got a 3 line here. So, and this is a thought, and then this is the basis of this thought. For all his, why is God the rock, and why is his work perfect? Well, it's because he operates within justice. Everything that he does is according to justice. So this is going to be, we have either these lines, these rhythmical lines of thought, they oscillate and trade in accentual, syntactic, and semantic principles. So this here is just simply what the bishop called is synonymous synthetic parallelism. They're just statements, and the relationship here is the correspondence is this is a declaration of God's nature, and then this is a basis clause. He tells you why, the basis for this, for Moses proclaiming the name of the Lord. It's because his ways are of justice. Now, when we come down here to the next line, it's going to become more synonymously related. A God of faithfulness and without injustice, righteous and upright is he. So you can see this is synonymously related, and we obviously here have a 4-3. We've got 4 words, prosodic words, followed by a 3, but this is semantically related. Faithfulness, without injustice, righteous, upright is he. So this is God's character. This is what Moses is proclaiming. Okay? Now, and so this is declaring the character of God, because this now is the thesis statement. 4-6 is the thesis statement. Verse 4 tells us God's character. Verse 5 is going to tell us the people's character. And then verse 6 down here is going to then tell us, these are rhetorical questions, basically, based on the people's character. What were you thinking? So here we have in verse 5, he has dealt corruptly against him. They are not his children because of their blemish. A perverse and crooked generation. So here in this line, there's a couple different thoughts here. He has dealt corruptly against him. And then they're characterized within this line, they are not his children on account of their blemish. So this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is a 5-3. Okay? Somewhat, a little odd. It's usually not, it could be a 4-3 or a 2-3, or a 4-5, something like that, 5-4. But here we have 5-3, and it's not impossible. I don't know what's going on with my pin here. Gotta stop that. Let's come down here. Okay, all right, got control of the pen. Somehow it just started dribbling. Okay, so the basis, the reason why this is the thesis statement is because he juxtaposes here the character of God against the character of the people. So this is then antithetically related. But God's character is formulated in these two distichs here, and a lot of things come here within what we would call a quatrain, which is 4 lines here, and you'll see that in verse 6 is another quatrain. Okay, and we already saw in 2 that this was a quatrain, and so a lot of ideas are developed by the poets of the Old Testament in 2 distichs, and so they tell us of the character of God here in verse 4, and then verse 5 is just it's just 1 distich, and it sufficiently tells us. But then look down here at the rhetorical questions. Shall you repay in this manner to Yahweh? And then he says, a foolish people and not wise. Is not your father the one who begot you? He is your maker and the one who established you. So he's asking them questions, is this how you're going to, repay Yahweh, is by, you have dealt corruptly against him. They are not his children by means of their blemish, So these are then criticisms, and then he follows it up with these rhetorical questions in another, quatrain here. But once you come to verse 7, now verse 7, the whole thought changes. Okay, now he's telling them to jog their memory. Remember, the days of old. Discern the years of generation and generation. Ask your father, and he will declare you. Your elders, and they shall tell you. So here's another quatrain. But now we're talking about, remember, this is point B here, about the history of God's benefactions with Israel. So verses 7 to 9 deal with the past, God's past beneficial, benefactions to Israel. Once we go to 10, I put over here on the side over here, verse 10 following, and you'll note here, he found him in a land of wilderness, in a howling, wasteland of desert. He encircled him, and he took note of him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye, as an eagle stirs up its nest, and it hovers over its young. He spread out his wings and took him. He lifted him up upon his pinions. So these are then just, poetic things to talk about the present, okay? The present time. He found him in a wilderness land. He, in a waste howling land. He encircled him, and he discerned him, or he, took note of him, and guarded him as the apple of his eye. So this is basically talking about when God, took Israel out of Egypt, okay, and then led them here. Verse 11 would be referring to, as leading them to Mount Sinai, I would think. So this is going to the present. Now verses 7 to 9 are definitely talking about the past. So 7 to 9 you want to. That's why I separated it from 10 following, because once you get to 10, it's talking about the present time. They don't need to ask, your father or your elders, okay? They don't need to remember years of long ago and discern years of generation. This is looking past, looking backwards. Now, when you come to 10, it's looking forward. So, yeah, I'm just saying is that it's important when we go through a text that you're able then to discern, the flow of the text, and it's a lot easier than to dissect the different units and just think about them on that basis. So it's really nice here that the text all breaks down into these units. And the flow of the text is amazing. We'll talk a little bit more here. Let's go on to our next slide, and we'll talk more specifically here about verses 7 to 9. Okay, then we're continuing on here in verse 7 to 9, and this deals with Yahweh's past benefits to Israel. When we get over here to 10 following, then it will be Yahweh's present, the present history of Yahweh's beneficial acts for Israel. But for now, we're looking at the past. And this is really organized really well when we come here from verses 7 to 9. So it starts off here with 2 quatrains. The first comes in 7 with a series of imperatives, and then this sha'al here is to be palindromatically understood here. So it would be sha'al zekenecha, ask your elders and they will tell you. And then when we get down to verse 8, we have these series here of temporal clauses, but it makes up another quatrain, and then it ends in verse 9 with the basis clause, key. So let's look at this text, and we're going to, this will be, very much what we would understand as semantic parallelism, or semantic parallelism, and we'll look at this. Remember the days of long ago, discern the years of generation and generation. Ask your father, and he shall declare to you. And then, ask your elders. Palindromatically brings Sha'al over here. Your elders, and they shall tell you. Okay, and then it goes into the temporal clause. When the Most High gave an inheritance to the nations, when He separated the sons of Adam. So, and this refers back to here. This is referring back, temporally backwards here to talk about these ancient times of old. Okay, and it concerns when Yahweh gave an inheritance to the nations and to the sons of Adam. But let's look at the poetry. Remember the days of old. That's the first. This is it says, remember, they're linearized rhythmical thoughts. So the first thought is, remember the days long ago. And then it's followed up by, discern the years of generation and generation. Okay? And then it says, ask your father. This is an imperative. Ask your father, and he shall declare to you. Your elders, and they shall tell you. And so you can see here, this is a 3, 3. This is another 3, 3. Dor vador, as Makef here binds this as a prosodic word. And then likewise down here, we've got a 1, 2, 3. We got a 1, 2, 3. So he's working on 3 by 3s. And look at this: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So he's really, he's working on his poetics here, and it's working out for him here. And when we come to verse 9, it becomes a 4-3, which is fine. But remember now, he's asking them to jog their memory, to go down memory lane and beyond their years to the years of long, long ago. And so we don't really discern anything but verse 8 in the temporal clauses, when the Most High, Elyon, when Elyon gave an inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam. Okay, so we know all of this. This comes with the table of nations. Okay, and you have that in Genesis 11, and it's using this same terminology when he separated the sons of Adam. So this goes back to the Tower of Babel, okay? After the flood, and when Shem, Ham, and Japheth had produced their own offspring, and basically the table of nations there in Genesis 11 is there's these 70 nations. It comes out to be right around there, 70 nations. And that the Most High, he's the one who's, giving the peoples their boundaries. You can see Paul is using this very terminology here in Acts 17. That from one blood he determined the times and places of humanity and their habitations, and what time they should live. So this is Paul's thinking in his mind. He's thinking of this very very concept that's right here encapsulated in the the Ha'azinu here of Deuteronomy in the song, and he's referring to to verse 8, and it's so it's when the Most High gave an inheritance to the nations when he separated the sons of Adam. So you can see here that these are synonymous. This is synonymous parallelism. So was every single distic so far. Ask your father who will declare to you your elders, and they will tell you. So this is all, these rhythmical thoughts are operating according to semantic parallelism quite fine here. And now there's some real questions here when we come here to the bottom of verse 8. He set up the boundaries of the people according to what? The B'nai Yisrael. But there's the LXX, says he set up the boundaries according to the angels of God, angeloi, theos, according to the sons of God, or the angels of God, excuse me, and then we have it in the in 4Q Deuteronomy, I think J, we have a portion of a portion of Deuteronomy that reads. It doesn't read according to the sons of Israel, but it's according to B'nai Elohim. And so when you have B'nai Elohim, the Septuagint typically would translate that, they wouldn't translate it sons of God, but they would translate it the angels, or the angels of God. Okay, and this is typical, and so in some of the modern translations, you'll see it'll say according to the number of the sons of God. That's how and even in all newer manuscripts, they're gonna have a note here that says that alternate reading is according to the sons of God. And so what this is saying is that when God created, divided the world up at the time of I believe there back there in Genesis 11 after the Tower of Babel, that Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all of their genealogies work out into 70 nations, and so these boundaries were determined by God, whom Moses refers to here as the Most High, of which he is. People have made a notice of the Most High and the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. So over the sons of God is the Most High God. But this is just referring to the class of angels. If we read, as in 4Q Deuteronomy J, the B'nai Elohim, as we know from the book of Job, are the angels. So there isn't a polytheistic note in this. If you were a pagan, you could read that into it, but scripturally, as far as the Hebrew Bible, that's not something that we're going to get into. So it's important here that God has set up the boundaries and the borders and the times in which people have lived, according to Paul, and it's either according to the number of the sons of Israel, because remember, according to the Masoretic text, 70 people came out of came out of Canaan into Egypt. So we just have two different readings here, whether it's according to the sons of Israel, or if we go back, to some of the later texts, earlier texts, which, I give this. I would put both readings in the text side by side. I wouldn't just put it in the margin, because the Dead Sea Scrolls that in the Septuagint are the oldest readings we have. We don't know exactly all the, maybe what is necessarily the correct reading. But just note here that sometimes in our reading of the Bible, we have two different readings, and I would just say be comfortable with both, and just say that God felt it's fine that both of these readings were left, and it doesn't change our faith at all by any means. But the Septuagint was the first one to offer us a different reading for B'nai Yisrael. I believe that they were reading what Qumran did, B'nai Elohim. Okay, and then it ends in verse 9, for the portion, the portion of Yehovah is his people. Jacob is the allotment or the cord of his inheritance. So, the rest of the nations, their borders were set up according to the rest of mankind. The 70 nations, according to the B'nai Elohim, to the sons of God. But here, it's making it. This is, you can either read this but or for, but this is saying that, the portion of Yahweh is his people. Jacob is the inheritance, is the cord of his inheritance. So that this here is making a distinction that Israel specifically belongs to Yahweh, whereas the nations were given their inheritance in accordance with the number of the angels. Okay, as the Septuagint says, or the sons of God, as the Qumran text says, and that's how we are to most likely read this. But note here that Israel, there's a lot of discussion about Israel right now, within Christianity, and for good reason. Okay, and I don't vouchsafe everything that Israel does as we know that they are the chosen and elect people of God. That will never change. Just read Romans 11. That's all you need to know, and especially verse 25 of Romans 11. They're enemies for your sake on account of the gospel, but beloved according to the Father. So, and then Paul says that all is, when the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, all Israel will be saved. So we know that they're God's chosen people, and now it doesn't mean just because they're God's chosen people they're going to heaven. Okay, all you have to do is just read the Hebrew prophets, and you'll find out that most of Israel were flaming heathens, just like they are today. Just go to Tel Aviv. It rivals San Francisco for all their LGBTQ stuff. Iran stopped their gay parade. Bruce Jenner went over from America to go dance in the streets of Tel Aviv, and when the rockets started coming in from some pretty nasty people, they were, God was using that to chastise Israel because of their wickedness in the streets of Tel Aviv. The Ayatollah stopped the gay parade in the streets of Tel Aviv. That's so biblical. God used various nations, ungodly nations, to chastise God's people. It's no different today. So as far as understanding, they are God's chosen people. You can never say they're not. He's not. When Christ returns, he's coming back to Jerusalem. He's not coming back to some other place. So, these are God's chosen people, but to whom much is given, much is required. And what's required of them is that they accept their Messiah. Okay, so this is just this fragment here that is found in Qumran, 4Q, Deuteronomy J. This is just the fourth cave from Qumran, Deuteronomy, manuscript J, this fragment. But here we have the reading B'nai Elohim. I just wanted to show you that. Okay, this has been another session of biblical theology, exegesis, and hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. Please like, share, and subscribe.